What up, my ninjas? I'm Strydent, and I am back with another video, and this is one of those ones that's been a long time coming. So, on Toy News International today, I came across an article that said, G.I. Joe is dead, long live G.I. Joe. And pretty much the article was kind of trying to figure out what is going to happen to the brand. What's going to happen to G.I. Joe? Because 2014 marks the 50th anniversary of the G.I. Joe brand, and Hasbro, for those of you who don't know, they haven't been showing up to any conventions since the movie, since Retaliation dropped. Just about every retailer that used to carry G.I. Joe has stopped carrying G.I. Joe, and Toys R Us is the primary major retailer that carries G.I. Joe. I already showed you what Hasbro is giving us for the fall. It's pretty much they're emptying out the concept case and a couple figures that were meant to be part of the Retaliation line, like the eel. You saw it in a box at a Toy Fair 2 years ago, and then you saw it again last year. Now it's being released as a 50th anniversary figure. Along with the Lady J and the Flint that we saw that were in the Pursuit of Cobra style. They're being released in these 2-packs, and all that stuff is coming out this fall. And that's it. That's it. That's all we know of for G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe's presence, you still see it with Joe Con and all that stuff because you have fans that are responsible for the various conventions, you know what I'm saying? And they find ways to make molds of, older figures that have already been released, mix and match parts and then give an exclusive. And they're extremely overpriced. I don't care what any of the fans say. I don't care what the logic is. They're extremely unrealistically overpriced to the point where it's like, why do I want them? The figures are back to that gaudy neon colors and shit that just doesn't look right. And for all the customizers that are so into making G.I. Joe realistic, how is this acceptable? How does that make sense to those who attend these conventions and pay hundreds of dollars for those characters, like Crimson Asp, and she was wearing like lime green and fucking neon green, or lime green and mustard yellow or something like that. Like, that's not Crimson. It seems like G.I. Joe has lost its way. And Hasbro has lost its way. And a lot of the fans have followed suit, G.I. Joe is not Call of Duty. G.I. Joe is not fucking the Hurt Locker. G.I. Joe is the superheroic version of the world's, secret paramilitary organization that's fights Cobra. Cobra uses space age technology to fight soldiers. It's like Contra. But the fans, quote unquote, they don't get this. And the same thing goes for Hasbro themselves. They've forgotten. They're not using their imagination. Nothing. So what I bring to you today is what I would do if I were in charge of the G.I. Joe brand. Like if tomorrow Hasbro called me and said, I saw your video, I've looked at your page, you are passionate about G.I. Joe, we're going to pay you, X amount of thousands of dollars a year, and, we want you to save G.I. Joe. What's the first things you would do? I'm going to tell you right now in this video how I would handle G.I. Joe as a brand. So let's jump into this shit already. Okay, so first, I would get the old creative teams back. Those guys had the vision, the imagination, they had the foresight, even though they didn't think it was going to be as big as it was, they thought about it in a way that actually worked for the target audience. You know what I mean? I mean, look at us. It's 50 years later. Some of us are in our 30s, some of us are in our 40s. I know guys in their 50s and older that have been collecting G.I. Joes. Not just the original G.I. Joe, but a Real American Hero and all the other versions of G.I. Joe. And it appeals to us still. Some of us don't have any type of interest in joining the military, but we like G.I. Joe because we like the action and adventure and the the style that was given to us with G.I. Joe. So I would get those old guys back, all the ones that are still alive and still with us and still working and still able. And if I couldn't find all of them, for those that I can't put back in their original place because they're not here or whatever, I would find people with that similar kind of drive. Because this corporate exec bro type bullshit where you're just the generic corporate douchebag that has no idea who you're actually appealing to, this shit doesn't work. It takes the fun out of the freaking, brand. So screw that. The people in that job right now, we'll put them somewhere else in the company or get rid of them. And we're bringing back the people who know their shit. Another area we need to focus on is creating new teams with specific focus. And I know most companies already have this, but obviously the ones that are in charge at Hasbro dealing with G.I. Joe have no fucking clue. When I say specific focus, I'm talking a team specifically dedicated to creating video games for G.I. Joe. And these guys need to be passionate about games, and they also need to be passionate about G.I. Joe. Not just the fake passion where they say, oh, I've been playing games my whole life. Oh, I've loved G.I. Joe my whole life. And they just frequent Wikipedia. I'm talking about they need to have the collections. They need to have played with all this shit. They need to understand the difference between G.I. Joe and the real fucking military. We need a team dedicated to new cartoons. I say take the Resolute brand and just keep going with it. Make Resolute encompass many of the things that are the Pursuit of Cobra. And, obviously fix some of the issues that we had the first time around, but we need a new cartoon. It's just that simple. You can't have the toys and not have the cartoon. It just kind of feels like you have to, because one kind of helps push the other. And since this is the way that the series had been the most successful, they need to do it. And when I say cartoon, it can't be a non-quality cartoon. It has to be a quality cartoon. You can't just put out some bullshit like they did in the 90s with the Dick series, where when Sunbow was done, you had this bullshit that was just poorly drawn. Characters were off model, poor animation, the whole nine. And then, of course, there were standout episodes that kind of worked. None of that shit works. You can't have such low quality stuff following this. I mean, and not to mention the stories were just horrible. You can't do that. Now, this one I know I'm going to get some shit for, but movies. We need a team dedicated to movies. And when I say real movies steeped in the Joe-verse, the actual Joe-verse, I'm talking start with the OG 13, which would be like maybe before, like a story about them, the very, very beginnings of G.I. Joe. Then do a Real American Hero, which is the forming of the actual G.I. Joe team. Then a Pursuit of Cobra, which is a modern Joe story, obviously, where you have all the Joes showing what the organization has become in modern days and the threats they deal with now and how Cobra has changed. And then you could do spotlights, which could be web series, it could be TV series, it could be whatever, that focus on one or a couple Joes. Then do Future, where whatever it is that's crazy, if it's a comic book story or if it's a one-off story that, you team up with a bunch of writers that are actually current writers that are actually, Larry Hama is involved in writing, not just okaying what's done. Because, I mean, as long as he gets paid, you have to understand it is a job. And since they credit him as the godfather of G.I. Joe, they don't credit him, or as the father of G.I. Joe, they credit him with helping. They don't credit him with creating the entire universe, because most people don't realize how important those file cards were to how you shape your own Joe-verse as a collector, as a kid playing with G.I. Joes. So if they had him involved in actually writing a story for a movie, a spotlight movie, a future movie, a Real American Hero film, like a real American Hero film, because all these are periods. If the OG 13 series takes place in the 60s, they'd be fighting different threats using different weapons. The idea of space aged back then is different from what it is now. Then a Real American Hero, it's the 80s. Same situation. Star Wars program is new. You got different weapons. What's considered futuristic and cutting edge for G.I. Joe in the 80s would be different from Pursuit of Cobra, which is now. And it just keeps going on, you know, and the same goes for Cobra. Their weapons would get more and more out there as time goes on. So you need someone who's capable of actually understanding that, instead of these idiots that keep trying to make G.I. Joe feel like it's this real entity. Because if G.I. Joe existed, there would be no World Trade, 9/11 wouldn't have happened. If G.I. Joe existed, you know, the first bombing of the World Trade Center wouldn't have happened. So we need to stop trying to make the two things, you know, insert G.I. Joe into the real world and make it its own fucking thing. So that way we can have crazy shit. We can have Serpentor. We can have Sergeant Slaughter, or a guy like Sergeant Slaughter. You know what I'm saying? We don't have to keep on trying to make it real. I'm sure on my various Joe pages, on the various Joe communities, those who actually served know that real combat, real service is actually different. It's way different from G.I. Joe. And I'm sure they wouldn't have a problem escaping for a while from all the stress. I mean, there's good times too, but all the stress that the real thing entails. So we need that kind of logic going with the films. Not to mention, films help create some awesome figures and toys, essentially. So if you have versions of all these toys that span all these time periods, because they are different time periods in the history of this franchise, it's respect to the different types of fans that you have, the different age ranges that you have, because the guys who were real hardcore G.I. Joe in the 80s may not like all this modern shit. You know what I mean? Because there's a certain kind of hardcore, it's like World War II buffs. They like that stuff because there's not all these computers and stuff. It was real guys. It was fucking, you know, sweat, blood, piss, and vinegar. Everybody's fucking out there doing what they're doing. Or there's that real fear for those of the folks that, you know, they were kind of not built for the kind of shit they were going through. So the stories are different. The types of heroism is different. So you're respecting all those different types of, you know, people and all those different demographics and different thought processes, and it would make things a little bit more interesting if you're a younger fan and you see how long the series spans. I mean, look, Marvel did that shit with Captain America. They gave us a World War II version of two World War II versions of Cap, and they gave us a World War II version of the Howling Commandos, the whole nine. Can we get, like, G.I. Joe get some respect in the same kind of way? You know, it would make sense. Give us, before G.I. Joe, we can have Hawk and Colton. And then a couple of the guys who would become some of the higher ranking, you know, people like General Ray and shit like that. Anyway, that's the movies. The last part of this beginning portion of G.I. Joe restructuring is the convention team. You need a team dedicated to conventions. Preview what's coming at conventions. And then, you know, like, or demo it preview it at conventions, demo it at conventions, as well as, you know, Joe-related conventions. Do not do this bullshit where we got all these Joe exclusives at Comic-Con, and we got all these Joe exclusives at, you know, various Comic-Cons, I guess, but not, you know, anything geared towards the Joe fans specifically. G.I. Joe is one of those unique franchises to have its own convention. It caters strictly to G.I. Joe fans. Utilize that. You know, do giveaways at those I mean, I know they do some of this stuff, but recent years Hasbro has not been in attendance. They should be in attendance all the time. They should be holding the fucking convention. It shouldn't be us putting together a fucking convention for something that we like. It doesn't make any sense. It's just kind of stupid when you think about it in the grand scheme of things. This should be one of those things where Hasbro is like, shit, we've been around this long. People love us. Let's put some money into this thing and make it better than what it is. Take it out from under the hands of, or work with, the fans that created it. Help make it something big and better. You know what I mean? Instead of just bullshitting, you know? Because it just doesn't make any sense. If there was a convention dedicated to my characters and things I created, like a War of the Gods convention, you know, WarCon, or fucking, I don't know, something, the InsanaCon or some shit like that, you know, I would be right there spearheading that shit, because, I mean, it's all stuff I created. So, you know, the celebration, needs to have the people who are being celebrated, the company that created that which we are celebrating. I wouldn't have as many exclusives. I would just have early access to things that are going to come out. So, you know, we have a handful of figures that are coming out in the next year or the next couple years. You'd show up there. You know what I'm saying? Now, for the part everybody's been waiting for, because I've been talking about this since forever. How do we handle the figure lines? Well, this is the simple part. Have several figure lines. If you notice, Star Wars, various Marvel lines, Transformers, Ninja Turtles, He-Man, they've all had like the title line, one line that's dedicated strictly to whatever the main franchise is, you know? Like Transformers has Transformers. I think it's called Transformers Universe now. So that's everything. There's characters that span all over the place except for the films. Then they have the various film lines. Then they have Prime. Then they have, you know, GoBots. Then they have Rescue Bots. Then they have, you know, all those sub divisions. G.I. Joe needs the same fucking thing. I mean, we had them in the 90s, but they were kind of give or take. Some of them were good, some of them were bad. But in recent years, they've gotten confused, because at least in the 90s, you knew that if you were going to buy a Ninja Force figure, they were going to be ninja related. They're going to have swords and shuriken and knives and shit like that. You know what I mean? Whereas nowadays, from 25th anniversary all the way to Pursuit of Cobra, they were kind of just smashing things in there. Pursuit of Cobra was a little bit more unique, but when you look at the 25th anniversary, you had Resolute shit popping up within the same time and in the same places as your 25th anniversary stuff, which makes no sense. Resolute should have been its own line. 25th should have been its own line. You know, Matt Tracker should not have been a 25th anniversary figure. Make a mask line if that's what you wanted to do. So what I am implying, or what I am proposing, is you have 6 lines. And the 6 lines work like this. The first line will be your modern line. That would be your Pursuit of Cobra line. I say continue that title, use it. It worked. It's your modern line. It's all the modern reimaginings of all the figures and vehicles from every era that made sense. So your classic G.I. Joe stuff from A Real American Hero forward. You would just pick and choose characters. Obviously, you have to have the main ones, but you have to have reimaginings of those characters. We wouldn't necessarily, I mean, every character is someone's favorite. So I'm assuming if you want longevity in the line, you would cover everyone. And in this line, you would make sense of all the missteps that were made back in the day. All the figures all across all these lines would be engineered to properly pose. They can all kneel down, you know, take a knee. They can all shoulder a rifle. They could all properly support their gun hand when they're using a pistol. All weapons would be able to be held in all the hands of all figures. All elbows would be double jointed, so they can properly bend and do things, you know, cross their arms, hands behind their back, whatever. All weapons would fit in every hand. Everything would be engineered so that it works, because there's no reason why a figure line that's been around for so long should have those Duke arms from 25th anniversary. That should never exist. There's no reason why we should have the Pursuit of Cobra hands. There were a lot of early Pursuit of Cobra hands, and some of the newer ones that just don't hold weapons right. You put them in their hands, you pose them, you go to take a picture, and then they pop out. The weapons pop out, you know, or you just can't get the hand to stay closed long enough to hold on to a weapon. So all that shit would be fixed, and like I said, you would reimagine all these classic designs just like Pursuit of Cobra was already doing. Next up would be your classics. Now, a lot of companies have been doing classics, and you already know, because we already had this with G.I. Joe. Only with my retooling, like I said, no Pursuit or 25th anniversary Duke arms, no hands that can't hold weapons, no weapons that can't fit in the hands of those, you know, the characters they're supposed to. None of those knives, those shitty knives that are so small. You can take them out of the sheath, which is awesome, but they can't fit in the hands of the Joes that they're supposed to go to. No, everything would be tooled so that every figure can hold their weapons. This would be all the 80s shit redone. It'd be exact to spec with the 80s shit. Because, I mean, let's be real. You always have people who like the retro stuff more than they like the new stuff. I already went over this with the films, and you know, we're back at this with the figures, and it's the truth. Some people, they just have more of a bond or a connection to the old stuff. So you do the old stuff, old figures, old vehicles. You make sure that the vehicles can fit just as many as they fit back in the day. You make sure they have similar effects. If effects are more expensive, then cut the freaking gimmick away altogether. You know, no ejection seats in your Sky Strikers, but make the Sky Striker still seat 2. You know what I'm saying? Things like that. Don't make the stupid hinge on the Sky Striker activate the wings and, or I'm sorry, retract the wings and not, you know, put out the landing gear. You know what I'm saying? Like, fix those kind of stupid inconsistencies. Wings out, landing gear in. Wings in, landing gear out. So they could sit on the flag. You know what I'm saying? Retool, engineer all the vehicles when you redo them. And you would just make a killing because of the nostalgic connection to all these people. Now, in a couple generations, most of us will be too old. So this is something you'd have to get on right away. It'd be one of the first lines done under my leadership, quote unquote. Next, we have the Future Wars. This would be a concept line. All the new technologies that we would be trying to work with to kind of up the ante for G.I. Joe figures in the future would be in this line. You know, 6-inch versions of some of those characters, but in a new version of the character. You get what I'm saying? New versions with new gimmicks, if any, new types of sculpting, new types of engineering on the figures, new types of weaponry, new tech. Because one thing that should be happening from each era to each era to each era is you update the tech that was present in the previous era. So we'd have new Weather Dominators, we'd have new, Sky Strikers, new, a new flag, a new Rolling Thunder, whatever. Everything would be new, a new General Hawk, who might be younger than the previous one because this is the future. So this might be a new General Hawk, completely new guy. It could even still be the same guy. The point of the matter is, this is the progression, and this is where we would test out things that we're not sure would fit with the previous versions of G.I. Joe. Just the next step. You know what I'm saying? It'd just be really simple. And I'm pretty sure people would like that. One thing I want to add, though, that all of these lines need to have is a wave of troops. Just plain troops. You're going to hear about this again, but the wave of troops means you would have, 4 or 5 different body types, and, you'd have women, obviously, but you'd have a brown guy, a tan guy, a white guy, and like a reddish brownish guy, so he could be Hispanic or like Native American or something. And then you'd have those same shades but in the female, and you would have a couple weapons to come with them so that you could round out your troops with each of them. Because one thing that should have been a focus along all the G.I. Joe lines is troop building. They should have made enough troopers so that everyone could have at least 10 blue shirts or 10 green shirts or 10 of each, you know what I'm saying, together in their lines. So you would see new troopers obviously in the Future Wars line. Next up, the movie lines. This is my favorite because this is what brought me back to G.I. Joe in the first place. Movie lines would simply be a full representation of everything that you saw in the film. If it's doable in toy form, we do it. None of this shit where you sneak in characters that should have been part of the 25th anniversary or your classics line. None of this shit where you're throwing in cartoon versions or comic book versions or exclusives from 20 years ago or 15 years ago. None of that shit. If it was in the movie, it belongs in the movie line. If it wasn't, then it belongs in a different line. Plain and simple. I don't care if you guys got used to this, You know what I'm saying? Because that's the company misrepresenting itself. Retaliation was a fucking embarrassment when it came to a movie line. There were like 6 or 7 fucking movie figures. You know what I mean? Like actual movie figures. Roadblock got 2 of those figures. And then you had Duke, you had Flint, you had the regular or the second Snake Eyes they released with the 2. They came with the 2 proper swords with the brown handles. You had that mockery of the movie that was Jinx, and that was really it. There was nothing else in the movie line that actually resembled the characters that were in the film. None of the ninjas. I mean, you didn't even get a movie accurate Cobra Commander. You didn't get a movie accurate Storm Shadow. That's a fucking travesty. You wasted all that awesome design and you didn't even scratch the surface. Oh, Flint. I don't know if I said Flint, but you got Flint. But even he was kind of close. There were things missing. We would be 100% on point with this. The main characters would get a 6-inch version of their movie look, as well as the 3 3/4-inch version. So, like, if there were 5 or 6 main characters, or like 8 main characters, there'd be 8 6-inch figures. That would be its own little, like, wave within the wave, or line within the line. You get what I'm saying? Like, those would be the special ones that you would see kind of alongside, instead of those big 12-inch weird stiff 5 points of articulation, you know, they scream at you type shits that you keep seeing in the store these days. We would have a 6-inch version of the main characters, 3 3/4-inch version of all the rest of the characters, as well as the vehicles. And then the vehicles, the engineering of the vehicles would be really simple. If you saw 20 people fit into an APC in the movie, you will at least be able to put 15 of your figures into your APC. You know, if not exactly 20. Everything should be tooled to at least mimic what you saw in the film. I am so sick and tired of paying 20 or 30 bucks or 50 or more for a big vehicle that fits 8 characters. And then in the film, it seats 20 or 30. Do you remember the old APC from back in the day? You could fit like almost 30-something characters in there. 30-something figures. And that's including the drivers. Think about what we have now. There's not really that many things that can fit that much. But yet, I go one aisle over in Toys R Us, and I go to the True Heroes section, and I can pick up an APC that can fit 20 characters. I can pick up a freaking AC-130 that can fit about 10 or 12 Joes in there, not counting the pilots. Why is it Chap May can do it, and their figures are even bigger than the Joes, but they can fit, you can fit a gang of them inside of their vehicles, but we can't do the same thing over here on the Hasbro side? Like, that would be an end. And it'd be all across the board, but I use the movie lines specifically because Hasbro was notorious for taking ginormous vehicles that should have been, you know, as much plastic as what we see with the Chap May offerings, and Chap May makes vehicles that are actually reminiscent or based on the real deal. They're named the real deal. You know, you look at it, you can see that's a Chinook helicopter. It's not a big bird. You know what I'm saying? Which is a generic code name for, you know, anything flying. They're not doing that. They're making the actual thing, and then they're making it comparable. That Chinook helicopter is the reason why I haven't bought the Eagle Hawk. I think the Eagle Hawk is inferior compared to that. You know, I can fit so much crap inside that thing, and I do. I fit 20 Joes, and I'll say I'll fit about 15 with them all squatting and sitting up against the walls, you know, all around the inside and a couple in the center. You should be able to do that with a Joe helicopter. There's just no excuse. So, you know, engineering is important. It makes for better shit, and that needs to be there. And then, of course, you'd have your troops. Whatever soldiers you saw in the film, just like with Rise of Cobra, you would see that in this movie line, no matter what the movie was. Even if it's an animated movie, it's a movie, the line will follow the movie. Now, if the movie is, I don't know, focal on one character, and it's in a series, obviously you would just show everything, you'd make figures of everything that was shown in that feature focused on the one character, which means you'd probably have a couple good guys and a ton of bad guys. But it doesn't matter what the dynamic is of the film. If you saw it in the film and it was related to the two factions, there will be a figure or a vehicle made of that under my leadership. That's the way I would have done it. Next up, tune. You can't really do G.I. Joe and not have a tune, right? So if you're going to have a cartoon, in my estimation, it should be something along the lines of Resolute. You need a toy line that imitates or you know, what's the word? Represents everything that's, you know, given to us or shown in that cartoon. That means only this cartoon. You have a classics line. You know, I've divided all this shit into several ways to have several streams of revenue, essentially. Several different things selling to different demographics. The rate of release would be up to how well the things sell, but if you have a line dedicated to each thing, then every fan can find their little spot. They can get in where they fit in, and you keep making money, and you can keep the wheels turning. A tune is something that Hasbro's always done with G.I. Joe, and then they're surprised that in recent years G.I. Joe hasn't sold the way it used to. It's because you won't make a quality cartoon. Renegades was a cheaply made show. Yeah, it had some good plots. It had some cool tips of the hat to like the older fans and the older canon and whatnot. But we need a new cartoon to establish a new canon. Plain and simple. So you need a toy line to follow that, and that's what this would do. And just like I said before, everything would be engineered so that it works with everything. But if a guy is a pilot, the stick for his plane will be in the center between his legs so that he can grip that thing with both arms. You will have big enough shoulder ball socket joints or whatever so that they can actually reach with both hands and hold the stick in front of them like a real pilot, because it's part of the reason why we play with Joes is because you can get them to do things, you can pose them in ways that feel natural and that imitate the real deal, you know? So everything would be engineered so that everything works, and everything you see in this cartoon would be offered in figure form. It just makes sense, or in toy form. It makes perfect sense. Gone would be a lot of those stupid gimmick toys that they think that little kids buy, and you would only have these offerings, you know, your figures, your weapon sets, and your vehicles. And that's it. That way kids could pick up each thing, you know, and some characters would have less weapons than others because a medic wouldn't have an arsenal because he's a medic. So, you know, kids would have a variety of things to pick from. It just wouldn't be this focus on shit that doesn't sell and then complaining that, oh, this doesn't sell. It's because it's corny. Kids can tell when it's corny. You know, I mentioned before the 12-inch plastic 5 points, they might even have only 3. I don't know if their legs move, but kids do buy them, but then they sit. My babysitter, she has 2 boys. They have that stuff, but guess where it is? It's at the bottom of their freaking toy bin, and they only recently got this stuff because Retaliation's only been around for, what, a year and some change? And they're not playing with those things because they can't do anything with them. They're so stiff, and they're just poorly constructed, and they just don't look right. They don't look like fun, so that kind of shit needs to go. You need to make figures that you can play with that will stand up to whatever your kids are going to throw out. And Hasbro makes some pretty quality, you know, figures. I don't have the issues I've been having with DC collectibles. So, you know, you can give them that quality and give them shit they can actually play with. Call it a day. So whatever you see in a tune would be in this. And then if there's several tunes over a series of years, then the line would cover everything and then move to the next one. Cover everything and then move to the next one. That's the way it needs to be. So even if you don't see the next wave of new figures until the new cartoon, you know, you have one cartoon and it's about to finish, and we've kind of scheduled everything so that we're close to finishing the line by the time the cartoon is done, you'll see like kind of a overlap. You know, so that we can get those last bit of things that were shown. You can get them to the consumer and then move over to the next thing. That's how it would be done, you know, and then so on and so forth for as long as we keep making new cartoons. But personally, I'm surprised they didn't already do this. All right, lastly, we have troops. A line of troops would be awesome. Troops that span everything from your classics, your modern, your concept. Maybe not so much the concept, but your classics, your modern, your movie, and your tune. Just imagine being able to, you know, go to Toys R Us or go to Target. You go to the G.I. Joe section, and there's a wall of just troops in different colors and in two different shapes. You have your standard medium size, which is your regular soldiers, and then you have your big guys who would probably be carrying big weapons. Your big guys and girls. Why haven't we ever had female? Why isn't it just a regular thing to have female troopers? Why, you know, where are my female Crimson Guards? You know, what if Lady J is impersonating a Crimson Guard? Why don't I have a female body to put that on? You know, I know that they exist because I've seen them back in the day, but why isn't it just a regular thing? You know what I mean? At this point, the myth about freaking female figures not selling, it's just that, it's a myth. In the 80s it was true, but it's become a myth since then because look, Black Widow goes for 3 times the amount of many of the male guys in the male figures in the same line. Shit, she's more expensive than buying the rest of the figures in the line, you know, all together. So it's a myth. Boys will buy the girl if she's a badass. So why don't we have badass soldiers so that the boys can actually imagine they have a badass soldier? Make a character of their own that's a badass female soldier. Why is that an impossibility? Why is that not done? It would be done. You would have your, you know, your brown character, your tan character, your kind of pinkish tan character, more like a Caucasian kind of skin tone, and your like reddish brown character for your, you know, darker skinned, either Hispanic, Native American, you know, it'll fill in that kind of gap. Then their hair colors, we would just randomly paint different hair colors, and you would have the same colors in male as you do in female, and then you would have your standard size, and you would also have a couple big ones thrown in there randomly. They would be the only random thing in all the lines, would be the large guys. And every character, like I said before, all their bodies would be engineered to hold every weapon. And they would have only a handful of weapons, you know, maybe a pistol, a knife, and a assault rifle. Call it a day. The big guys would have a pistol or maybe a knife and a giant weapon. Call it a day. You don't have to go nuts. They probably have a helmet of some sort or an extra head that you can switch. That's like a special helmet. Maybe the Cobra guys would have a fancier helmet and the Joe guys wouldn't. But it's that simple, and it's all troops. The extra accessories for the troops that you would buy in sets would be weapon sets, and they would be weapon sets for the troops and for all these characters that span all those different, you know, lines. That'd be amazing. And then, you know, you could do things like, we were talking about this on Jotographs, and a couple guys mentioned making it a contest type deal that, you know, you could partner with like Toys R Us or something where, you know, on certain days they have, you know, an area set aside where you bring all your troops, or you take pictures and you bring the pictures to show off how big your army is, so that if kids are collecting, they can be like, mine is bigger, my army is bigger than yours, or look at how awesome my army is, or it matches better, or it just looks more, you know, awesome than whatever. Granted, there is a side of this that might seem too militaristic to the point where parents that are anti-war would just be like, fuck this, you know what I'm saying? But kids do this with cards, kids do it with Legos, kids do it with Nerf guns. So, you know, doing this with their toys wouldn't be that much different. The difference is we're promoting a fantasy version of military. If you grow up in a military family, then you'll know what real combat is, and you'll know the difference. You know what I mean? It's up to the parents, obviously, to create the difference. You know, explain to the kids what the difference is and make sure they know that and they understand it. But as far as playing with your toys, there's nothing wrong with having fantasy elements in your toys. You know, we had an argument about what G.I. Joe is. and how there's a lot of fans that they want G.I. Joe to be Full Metal Jacket or the Hurt Locker or, you know, Black Hawk Down or whatever. And I'm like, that's not what G.I. Joe is. G.I. Joe is like, G.I. Joe was essentially supposed to be not a reboot, but a follow-up or a continuation of Nick Fury and, you know, his Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And it didn't quite, I think they were called the Fury Force. That's what they were supposed to be called. And it didn't quite work out. So they ended up using them as a separate, you know, entity. Larry Hama ended up writing this. He wrote that, and he ended up using that concept to make G.I. Joe. And they used laser guns and ninja tactics and jetpacks and shit like that. And General Hawk said it best in the first issue, and this is what I said, you know, during our arguments on Jotograph, is that G.I. Joe, their job is to make miracles look easy. That's a direct quote from the first issue of G.I. Joe. Plain and simple. And after they did this, after he said that, then they go and they rescue Dr. Burkhart using jetpacks and laser guns. This is not the real military, and there needs to be a distinction. Obviously, there are parallels because they are military, but that's where it ends. What you do with the figures once you buy them, that's your business. So if you want to customize all these troops to look like actual, you know, United States Armed Forces, hey, do what you want. If you want them to look like GSG-9, do what you want. If you want them to look like SWAT, do what you want. They're yours. You bought them. But this is what's being offered. So you would have, in the troops line, you would have green shirts, blue shirts. You'd have security forces. You would have heavies. You would have Iron Grenadiers, the heavy Iron Grenadiers, as well as just the regular troops. You know, you would have Crimson Guards. You would have Cobra Special Forces. You would have Steel Brigade. And the list could go on and on and on. And you would have versions from different eras. That in itself could be a whole different thing that could even sell more than some of the other stuff. And I'm surprised that in the 50 years of G.I. Joe, we haven't seen this yet. 30 of A Real American Hero. But we haven't seen this yet, you know? And it doesn't make sense. So it's a big deal. Needs to be done. Next, we have quarterly accessory sets. So you have your winter, spring, summer, and fall. You would have weapon and accessory sets that kind of accompany what's been, you know, set out before, but it'd be different weapons. They'd be themed, though, similarly. You know what I'm saying? So, like, you know, wintertime, you get your Arctic sets. Summertime, you get your desert warfare. You know, summer, you get your urban warfare sets, you know, and in spring you get your I don't know, covert weapon sets, you know, and it'd be like the good guys version and the bad guys versions, and these would be weapons and stuff that are new. The accessory portion would be like restocks of missiles and things like that, because you remember back in the day, at least I remember this, and I know some of you guys will too, back in the day you used to be able to go to Toys R Us and buy a weapon set or like a refill of missiles for some vehicles that had missiles, and then it's something that ended up disappearing as time went on, and it made sense. My son loses all his shit, so these would be a godsend if you have kids that collect G.I. Joe and then they lose all their weapons, because, you know, they want to play with the toys outside and they want to bring them to school, or they want to bring them to, you know, wherever they're going, so they'll have them in their pockets, but they don't always go after the shit that they need to. You know, for those of us who make dioramas and stuff, we like getting weapons and stuff. And there's that company out there, Marauders, who, you know, if it was a perfect world, I would buy Marauders and make them part of this. So we would get the most bomb-ass weaponry with our G.I. Joe stuff. But realistically, why not just make the weapons that you're already making in the right kind of colors, and then just make accessory sets so you can go back and buy more if you need to, you know? It would make perfect sense, and it'd be really simple. It's one of those things that, I guess it's just too simple, and that's why we haven't seen it. I don't know. That's it as far as the weapon sets go. Next up, we have the oversized vehicles, 2 of them a year. Now, we've seen a lot of people showcase their various oversized Joe vehicles from back in the day. And I'm talking like your Flags, your Defiance, your Rocks, your mobile command centers, whatever, you name it, we've seen it. But a lot of us can't afford those things. I mean, I'm not paying $1,000 for a toy, you know, that's a toy that I had when I was a kid, or a toy that I had the opportunity to get when I was a kid but missed out on, and that it only cost $100 when I was a kid. You know what I'm saying? And now someone's trying to sell it for $1,000 plus. Fuck that. It still breaks the same way. You still connect it the same way. It still takes up the same amount of room. There's no fucking way that it ever should have got to that point. You know? Some of the figures and vehicles, or some of the vehicles that they're charging you thousands of dollars for now, in complete condition, you go on eBay and they're plentiful. If they're that plentiful, why are you paying that much money? So we're cutting that shit out. What I would propose is every year, release 2 oversized vehicles. They could be retools, they could be brand new vehicles, but everything would be re-engineered so they can fit more characters on it, more vehicles, whatever. A new flag. We've been needing a new flag for a long time. You know, I got the pit, and I was really happy with that. I mean, it could have been just a little bit bigger, like wider. But I'm happy with it. I'm not bitching about it. I like the way it works with my, you know, my existing figures. Now we just need to do more of that. So I would start off with one Joe. It would always be one Joe and one Cobra vehicle. And it would be like one in the middle of the year and one towards Christmas. Because summertime, people are out and about in stores. Christmas time, people are out and about in stores anyway because they got to buy, you know, toys and gifts for their families. I would start out with a retooling of the Cobra airship. You remember in the very beginning, I think it was called the Revenge of Cobra, one of the first G.I. Joe series. There was that big flying Cobra base with the head of a Cobra in the front. Not the AC-130 that had the head of a Cobra. This thing was black and it was round, like a big disc, and it had all those spines and things sticking off of it. I would have my people come up with some kind of, you know, design that mimics that but allows for playability and has, you know, compartments and places to put people. Maybe you can open it up and it's this big ass, you know, play set or whatever. But that would be one. And, you know, for the Joes, it would be like the Flag or the Rolling Thunder or something, you know. Retool it. What would it look like now? Or maybe one year you get the classic version and another year you get the new version. Like, what would it what would it look like now? But the key is, all these oversized vehicles would cost anywhere from $100 to about $200, and they'd be in the store. You see this with Star Wars all the time. I don't understand why they're not doing this with G.I. Joe. Obviously, there'd be less of these made than all the other things, but, you know, there you go. I think this would help a lot of people who were kind of like iffy about G.I. Joe and the quality of the vehicles and stuff. They'd see it and they'd be like, damn. And then once they buy it and they see all the features and they see the size, that's the big thing, the size. How many Joes can you fit on this thing? Can you actually have a fire team of Joes infiltrate this ginormous freaking, you know, airship? You know what I'm saying? Later on, obviously, do that AC-130 with the Cobra head on it. I would love that thing. I always wanted that, and I think I might even try to make one, you know, over the next couple years. You know, I'm going to try and grab another AC-130 and have it for Cobra, and then try to make one, because I enjoyed the look of that thing, and I would enjoy having one of those in my collection. We would make things like the Black Dragon VTOL. We would make an oversized version of that, so it could actually be a carrier, you know, for your ships. I mean, for your soldier troops. And it makes sense. It's stuff that was never done before, you know. It's stuff that, like I said before, you move over one aisle in Toys R Us to the Chap May shit and True Heroes, Sentinel One, whatever they're called right now, and you see big vehicles in a giant box that can hold a bunch of figures. They're 3 3/4 inch figures. Why is this so difficult? You know, a couple more inches here, a couple more inches there, and then they actually fill the box up And you know, if you have them dismantled, and that's the other thing, most of the Chap May stuff comes put together already, pre-assembled. And the Joe stuff, we have to put it together, yet it comes in a giant box and it only takes up half the box. No, I'm gonna fill that whole fucking box. We're gonna use the same plastics Chap May uses. I mean, Hasbro already has their factories in China. What are they doing with all this money? You know what I mean? Joe's costs like 3 times or 2 times what they did back when we were kids in the 80s. And what, 20, 30, 20 something years ago? Come on, that doesn't make any sense. So we would offer, like I said, oversized vehicles, retools of previous vehicles, but you know, offered at the right scale so that you could fit a whole bunch of your guys on there. A whole bunch of people could fit in there, a whole bunch of different features, compartments, whatever. We would do it up. They would cost anywhere from $100 to $199, obviously with some type of tax depending on where you live. Call it a day. I think that would make a lot of collectors happy. I'd be happy. You know, I've always wanted another killer whale, one that could float. So I ended up buying a freaking Leonard hovercraft. It was like a sea missions vehicle is what they called it. And I'm happy with it, but it can only fit 2 people. I want the big ass thing I had when I was a kid. I had the Night Force whale. I think it was called the Night Striker or something like that. I loved that vehicle, but imagine having that now, you know? And that's one of the ones you wouldn't even really have to retool except for the bubble underneath, the hovercraft portion. So anyway, that's one thing that needs to be done, and that would be done if I had. Next, we have realistic pricing of figures and vehicles. Now, for a long time, the price of the figures has been going up, and then the quality has been going down. It's to the point where now the only retailer who is like directly buying and selling figures from Hasbro is Toys R Us, and they sell them for a good $2 or $3 more than what they would go for anywhere else except for maybe like your drugstores. And that's stupid. I mean, I get why they do it, because you know, whatever the deal is with Hasbro, they up their price so that they can make more than what the deal is with Hasbro. You know, if they're $10 and 6 of that 10 goes to Hasbro and 4 goes to Toys R Us, if Toys R Us raises the price to $12, then that's $2 extra that they get, so they get an equal cut, or at least close to an equal cut as Hasbro. It's kind of underhanded, but it's a practice that's been done for a very long time. I get it. Cool. The thing is, for your consumers, you know how many times I've been to Toys R Us and I saw figures that I was like, man, I want this, but then I saw the price and I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna go to Target and go buy diapers for my kid and then go look and see if I see the same Joes there. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not gonna just drop the money just because it's there. I know that's a typical American thing, but we have to shop smart and stop just giving companies our money. Toys R Us is usually my last resort because they're so fucking expensive. Most of the time, you could save all that money if you go to like Walmart or if you go to freaking Target. Yeah, I know there's politics with Walmart and all the fucked up shit they do with their workers and, you know, their factories and whatever. But I'm just saying, I'm not super rich. I'm closer to working poor, just like many of us are. We work, we save, we try to save, and we provide for our families, and then we try to do those things on the side that are fun for us. There's no reason why a 3 3/4 inch figure should cost almost $20. That's just stupid. Not when there's 6-inch figures with more tooling, more sculpting, more articulation, more accessories that actually cost about that same amount and cost, you know, kind of closer to that to make. You buy SH Figuarts, you buy Marvel Legends, you buy, you know, many McFarlane figures, some of the DC collectibles figures, and you see all that tooling, that paint, all the different dry brushes and washing and all that shit. There's just so much on it that you could be like, just paint alone could cost almost $10. Almost. I mean, I know realistically that's not how it works. The paints are not that expensive. But what I'm saying is just the amount of work, I could see it. But then you look at a Joe and it's just all colored plastic. And there's a couple of paints on there and that's it. Why am I paying almost, you know, 10, 15, almost 20? Online, it's ridiculous. That should never be. Joe should go back to being $8.99, regardless of what line it is, regardless of what the, amount of accessories are. $8.99 for Joe's all across the board. Weapon sets could be something like, $6 or $5.99, something like that, Or if it's a big weapon set, if say like I said, each box could contain, I don't know, 5 sets of weapons or something like that, then make it, $5. Call it a day. And then have bigger boxes that have just about everything. Those can be like $8 to $9 or something like that. But there's no need for you to be freaking breaking the bank, breaking a 20, getting or spending a 20, dropping a 20 on a Joe. You should be able to drop a 20 on all of them. I found a Five Below store, and a lot of you guys were mentioning this on the G.I. Joe community on Facebook. They're selling them for $5, and this is the secondary market because they've already been sold to the store that was going to sell them initially. All the shit happened with retaliation, and then stores drop them from their planograms, and then they sell them to these secondhand stores. Technically, they're almost like dollar stores, discount stores. Like Marshalls used to do it, and they still do sometimes. That's where I bought a lot of my Rise of Cobra figures, from Marshalls and TJ Maxx. A lot of you guys have Ross and Hastings, but Five Below, I went and I bought about 6 figures or 5 figures, I think, at the time. The 5 figures that they had the least of, which were the Cobra Special Forces and the Crimson Guards. I brought them for $5 a piece, and I'm going back this week to buy a couple more. I'm probably gonna buy like 10 when I go back. 5 a piece, man. That's closer to what they should be in this day and age than the 10 something, 12 something that we've been paying for them. So, like I said, $8.99 is gonna be the cutoff for what Joe's cost. Vehicles, small vehicles, are gonna be like $8 because they fit 1 or 2 people. They're close to the size, usually about the amount of plastic that is used on a Joe, just in different ways. Most of those things are hollow, so it's a shell. $8.99, call it a day. Medium-sized ones. The medium-sized ones could be like $15 to $20, depending on how many things you can fit in there, how big they are. When I say mid, we'll say like you have Alpha, which is your small vehicles. Those are about the same price as a Joe. Your Bravo, they're about twice the size, so they should be about twice. That's like $15, $16. And then you have your large vehicles, which should be, $20 to like $40. Call it a day. You don't have to do any more. And then I already told you about the oversized vehicles. You could have, in between the large and your oversized, you could have another class, which could be like a carrier. And your carriers could hold maybe 10. They always hold 10. Make those things $50 to $60. There you go. It's done. It's so simple. And I know people say, oh, you have to figure in blah, blah, blah. No, you have to be realistic. If the figure in the box, the vehicle in the box, are close in size, and you don't put all these gaudy graphics on the box, just put what's necessary, make a nice design that actually works across all the lines. Like these ones have a purple box with the cool explosion, and like, you remember how old G.I. Joe's was the box was always black with the explosion, G.I. Joe, and then the picture of the vehicle you had, or the figure, and that's it. It was the same all across the board. Do that. Just make the box a different color for each of the other ones. Plain and simple. 4-color process, use 4 different colors for each of them. You know what I'm saying? Call it a day. Instead of doing all this other shit that doesn't really benefit anything, stop renaming the lines. Stop re-releasing, shit that we didn't want. Package. This is the other thing too, because this will go better with the proposed pricing. Package the same number of every character in a box or a case, whatever you want to call it. Stop short packing the characters we actually want. This is something that all these companies need to do, but Hasbro specifically. And I'm talking about the Black Widow. I'm talking about Ultimate Storm Shadow and Low Light and all those other guys that we're all searching for. Stop short packing, because it doesn't benefit you in the end, unless my theory was right that the people scalping and selling these high-priced figures are actually Hasbro a team of Hasbro's, folks that are doing this to bring money on the back end back to the company, which wouldn't make any sense, but, weirder things have happened, they need to stop. If there are 24, if there's 6 figures in a wave, and there's, 24, figures to a case, then you need 6 different figures. Call it a day. You don't have to be so, how does that benefit you to put 8, you have 6 figures, and then you just throw in that one extra figure, so you have 25 in a case. Say there's 24 figures in there, and you got 24 figures. Everybody's got some, even numbers, or actually, and that's never how it works really. The way they usually do it is the character that's the anchor gets 11, or 10, and then all the other characters, based on popularity, get less figures in the case. That shouldn't be, Popularity is important. We get it. As long as he's offered, people will buy him. You can keep on sending more, or you could project how many would it take to, to meet the need for this particular character. Because every time Duke comes out, Duke is a peg warmer. Every time, from when I started with Rise of Cobra to now, Duke is the peg warmer. But Duke is also the anchor for G.I. Joe. And on top of that, you killed him off in the film. So how is it in the toy line that he's the anchor for? You make the most of him and the least of the stars of the show. And in some cases, you didn't even make the stars of the show. That shit is gone. If I had something to do with it, that would all be gone. So, even number of figures, everybody gets the same number of figures, in a case. So that way on the shelf, we could see even numbers of characters. Because I remember back in the day, that's how it was. The only way you would lose out on this is if the scalpers got there first. But if everybody has the same opportunity to find these figures, every store that partakes in whatever agreements and decides to sell your figures, if they're getting the same numbers as everyone else, you have nothing to worry about. It'll cut down on scalping because they can't say, oh, it's rare. Because you could just go to Kmart, or you could go to Target, or you could go to Walmart, and you would find one at least. You know what I mean? Everyone would have a fair chance at collecting. And in the end, that means more money for the company. Yeah, you had to work out whatever you had to work out with your distribution, but you're already selling toys at these stores. So it's kind of a win-win, You got happy fans, you got happy retailers, and then you can sit back in your office at Hasbro, or if it's me running it, I could sit back in my office at Hasbro and say, damn, I did good, and be happy, and I could watch that bonus come in because I had a strategy that worked, And, this would also cut down on the need for some of these clubs that have all these weird exclusives. I would cut the exclusives out because it's kind of annoying that there are things out there that people can't get to, fans can't get to. You could have bought every Joe that was offered at retail, but you just can't make it out to, I don't know, Canada for a Joe Con or something like that, or New Jersey for the New Jersey one. And that means there's Joes out there you can't get. You know what I'm saying? Or you'll have a harder time getting. We need to make it where everybody has a chance to get everything that's offered. You know what I mean? Because it's the only way that we can fix all the bullshit that's been going on. It's too much. Joe's been all over the place. The releases have been all over the place. We need to stop where you hear half these people saying, in the 90s, I stopped collecting because of the gaudy colors. But then you look at the freaking Collectors Club, and they keep releasing gaudy colored figures. And people are paying $400 and $500 and $700 for these sets just because there's like 12 figures. No, if we didn't like that shit the first time around, there's no excuse for you to be giving that back to us. So no, you know what I mean? That kind of shit would stay in a classics line. So if you like classics, guess what? There you go. Call it a day. Enough of this weird all over the place for us, by us bullshit, because it's not getting us anywhere. Look, G.I. Joe's about to be either dead or way on the back burner. So, these are the majority of my ideas for what would fix, the problems that G.I. Joe has been facing for the last, several years. I've gone across everything from the different media to the different, different types of toy lines. I guess I could add that, in the video games, I would have all 4-player co-op fire teams in a sandbox mission-based, structure. So it's almost like Mercenaries on steroids, or like Saints Row or GTA, only military themed, with probably a better combat system, so that, if you play as Snake Eyes, you could actually fight things. You know what I'm saying? But it would be co-op, it would be mission-based, team-based, because G.I. Joe is all about teamwork, and you'd have these missions popping. Every game would have a bunch of missions, the Joe missions, Cobra missions, and you just go into storm bases, steal vehicles. Sometimes you come into the, your hot zone with a Joe vehicle or a Cobra vehicle. You could have Cobra missions where you could play, and they don't necessarily change the dynamic. And when I say change the dynamic, if you play as Cobra, it's just a Cobra-themed set of missions where you're killing off Joes. If it's G.I. Joe-themed missions, G.I. Joe missions, and you're attacking and killing Cobras. You're being attacked by Cobras, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like you have to beat the game as the Joes to unlock the Cobra stuff, because some people like Cobra better than Joe, so you'll have the option. Then you could have first-person shooters. Same kind of format. You got your fire teams. You could also play as Cobra instead of just G.I. Joe. You're going against either side. Mission-based objectives, obviously. You can hijack vehicles. It'd be like Battlefield with kind of the cinematic feel of Call of Duty. That would make sense for G.I. Joe. I'm really surprised that we haven't gotten this. You play all these Call of Duty, especially the Black Ops series, and it has the G.I. Joe feel, except you just don't have super crazy high-tech weapons. But I mean the kind of crazy over-the-top situations that you're in, it feels like G.I. Joe. And yet we haven't had a mod for G.I. Joe. We haven't had a G.I. Joe first-person shooter yet. I mean, it just doesn't make sense, and these are all no-brainers. So, when I was reporting that it seems like G.I. Joe is dead, it's on its way to being dead, there's the proof, you know what I'm saying? So this is my plan. I apologize for the black screen, but I wanted to get the point across and let you guys listen to what my points were further, my explanations for those points. I didn't want to, completely fill every single point up with a bunch of pictures. The pictures were only necessary for the ones that I put them in for, because they kind of were specific. But that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I believe that if I were in charge of the G.I. Joe brand, I believe that a number of us, if we were in charge, we would make, way better choices. At least half of what we want to do would work, at least half. But I think in most cases, everything that I've read, almost everything, would work. Doing the corny, making everything gritty and realistic would not work. Dumbing everything down again and making it purely for kids would not work. The key thing is that Hasbro doesn't realize and refuses to accept that even though many of their franchises are aimed at children, G.I. Joe is not for kids anymore. It's not. Kids don't really give a shit about G.I. Joe. It's the adults who were kids when this started. We are the ones that give a shit about this. So you have to market it to us. It would, just like Masters of the Universe Classics has been marketing to those kids who are now adults having kids. I mean, so much so that on the box for like Castle Grayskull, they recreated the old box that had a kid playing with Castle Grayskull, and they have a guy, like a grown man, playing with Castle Grayskull. Even when it's folded up in a little carrying case mode, they got the grown man walking around with the fucking, Castle Grayskull in carrying case mode. And not many grown men are going to carry their Castle Grayskull over to their homeboy's house, but they put it there because they know who they're dealing with. They know who they're trying to appeal to, and that's what Hasbro does not realize. It's hardly any kids really, amped about G.I. Joe like that, unless they had a father that was into it or a mother that was into it and they introduced it to their kid. So Hasbro really needs to kind of get on the ball and understand who it is that you're marketing these things to. We have money now because we're adults. We can get all the shit we couldn't get before. Many of us, like me, I've been getting all my shit off of eBay. So I've been buying off of other fans. I'm almost refusing to buy stuff directly from Hasbro because I don't like the way they've been handling stuff, and because they're not talking to me. They're not asking me for my input. You know what I mean? You're talking to these kids that all they do is play video games. They don't really even collect G.I. Joes. You're talking to the friends of people that work for Hasbro. You're not talking to the real people out there actually collecting. So it's bullshit in my opinion. So what you need to do is focus on the real consumers. You do what works for them. Don't ask the people that all they live for is stuff. You know what I mean? Because there is a good portion of us out there that there's no logic to what we do. It's just stuff. They're happy to have stuff, and they buy. Yeah, that makes you money, but that doesn't help you understand how to better your company. Because there's fewer of them than there are of people who will just support quality products. You know what I mean? There's a few people out there in the grand scheme of things that just throw money at shit. Don't even look at it. Don't even take it out of the package, nothing. They don't know what the quality is of what they're buying. But there's more of us that actually do, because we actually played with and kind of lived through all this stuff with those products. And we actually could tell you what the quality is. We could tell you where things went wrong and where things were at their high point. We can tell you what brings us back, you know? And it would make sense. Not the fact that we have money to burn and we just keep buying shit, leaving it in a package, and it just sits for years and years and years and years. I mean, yeah, that's a sale, but it's not a good estimation of how all this shit works and, you know, what the product actually is. So this is my honest opinion based on my experience with the Joe brand. I still buy G.I. Joes, you know, and I would buy more if more were offered for reasonable prices, with quality construction and quality engineering. I mean, Marauders is about to come out with their own figures. I got on that, and that was a Kickstarter. The best belief I'm going to get on it some more next year. There's other companies. Boss Fight Studios is releasing figures too soon. You best believe I'm going to be on top of that. So, you know, it's either this stuff that we are all, you know, mentioning is taken into account, and you take the best ideas from all that, and that would save it easily, or you just pass it on to someone else. Someone today mentioned, I think it was my homeboy Arnold, he mentioned they should just sell the franchise to like Boss Fight Studios or something. Boss Fight Studios is actually made up of past Hasbro employees. They know better than the guys there now what to do with the brand. Give it to them. You know what I'm saying? If you don't want to put the money into it and you just want to accept and get that stream of income coming in from this particular franchise, sell it. Call it a day. You had a good 50-year run. Let someone else run with the ball. So these are all ideas, possible ideas. I don't know. It'd be nice if someone at Hasbro was listening and they give me the opportunity to actually make these things happen, because I'd love to. It'd be a different type of job. I would have a team of people who are more experienced in how all this works on the analytics side and on the number crunching side, and we'd work with them, make shit happen, call it a day. You know, you'd even have a line of Fenris Company. I wouldn't have a problem selling that to G.I. Joe or to Hasbro. So I don't know. Maybe some of these other guys, like William Winchester, that character that I saw on he was on His Tank, and he was also on shown on the G.I. Joe community page. It's quality shit. Those could be characters that become part of the Joe-verse. You know, there's a lot of good original characters that should be part of the Joe-verse. So, you know, anything is possible once the ball starts rolling. The problem is the ball needs to start rolling. So anyway, that's my story for the second time, and I'm sticking to it. My name's Strydent, and I hope you dug it. Peace outside.